Now it was the governor's practice at this feast to free any prisoner that the crowd desired. At the time there was this rather infamous inmate named Jesus Barabbas, the meaning of which is the son of their teacher, who during the rebellion had committed murder and been locked away with the other insurgents. Then Pilate again rounded up the Jews, the chief priests, the rulers, and the people. And when the crowd had assembled there, they approached Pilate and asked him to do what he would customarily do for them. "You brought this man before me," Pilate declared, "as someone who corrupts the nation. Now behold, I have tried him here before you all, and have found him to be not guilty of the charges you have brought against him, as has Herod. Just look, he has even sent him back to us. Nothing that this man has done qualifies him for the penalty of death. Now it is your custom that I should release to you a prisoner at Passover, the feast of unleavened bread. I have this inmate named Barabbas, who has been condemned for murder, and this king of the Jews, Jesus, who is standing here before you all, and in whom I have found no guilt. I will punish him and set him free." He was now under obligation to release one man among them during the feast. "So which one would you like to have let loose among you?" Pilate asked. "Would you rather have me free Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus, who is known as the Messiah, the King of the Jews?" He knew full well, you see, that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had turned Jesus over to him. And as Pilate sat at his bar, his wife sent him this word: "Do not get mixed up with this honorable man, because I have agonized much today over a dream I had about him." But the chief priests and the elders worked the crowd into a frenzy and convinced them to have Jesus put to death and to have Barabbas released in his stead. And they all cried out as one, "Not him! Take this man away from us! Set Barabbas free instead! Give us this man in his place!" It was in that very city, you see, that Barabbas had taken part in an uprising and had been imprisoned for rebellion and murder. And out of his desire to free Jesus, Governor Pilate once again pleaded with them, asking, "Which of the two should I release to you?" "Barabbas," they answered him. "What then," asked Pilate, "would you have me do with Jesus, the Christ, the one you call the King of the Jews?" "Crucify him," the crowd responded with a shout, and they kept on screaming, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate appealed to them yet a third time, asking, "Why should I? What is his crime? I have found no basis whatsoever for putting him to death, so I will see to it that he is beaten, and then have him released." But they just screamed the louder, "Crucify him!" Then Pilate took Jesus and ordered him beaten. The soldiers twisted a crown of thorns, then they put it on his head, and dressed him in a purple robe. They approached him repeatedly and mocked, "Hail to you, O King of the Jews!" Then they slapped him in the face. Pilate then went out to them again and said, "Look, I am bringing him back to let you know that I have found no guilt in him." Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. "Just look at this man," Pilate bid them. When the chief priests and the officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And Pilate said to them, "You take and crucify him, for I have found no guilt in him." "We have a law," the Jews replied, "and according to that law he should be put to death for calling himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard them saying this, he grew even more disturbed, and he went back into the praetorium and questioned Jesus, "Where did you come from?" But Jesus did not answer him. "So you're not going to answer me?" Pilate said to him. "Do you not realize that I have both the authority to free you as well as to have you crucified?" "You would never have had such power," said Jesus, "had it not been given to you from above. So the one who handed me over to you is committing the more serious offense." Now Pilate was all the more anxious to let him go after he heard him say this, but the Jews kept on clamoring, "If you free this man, you cannot be Caesar's friend, because he has made himself out to be the Son of God, and a king as well. Would you have him take Caesar's place as king? Anyone who declares himself king does so in opposition to Caesar." And when Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat on the judgment seat at a spot known as the Pavement, but in Aramaic it is called Gabbatha. This took place at about the 6th hour on the day of preparation, during the week of Passover. And Pilate said to the Jews, "Behold your king!" But they just roared, "Away with him! Take him away and crucify him!" "Is it my role to crucify your king?" asked Pilate. The chief priests responded, "We recognize no king but Caesar." Now the Jews had Pilate really upset. "Yours has always been a seditious people," he retorted, "forever in opposition to those who wish to do you good." "And who might they be?" the Jews demanded. "The way I heard it," Pilate answered, "your God rescued you from unbearable slavery under the Egyptians, and guided you across the Red Sea as if by dry land. He supplied you with manna and quails in the desert, quenched your thirst with water from a rock, and entrusted you with his own law. Yet in spite of all this, you infuriated your God. A molten calf was all you wanted, and this so enraged your God that he would have wiped you out completely had Moses not intervened on your behalf. And even though you were spared, you have the nerve to implicate me as one who despises the emperor." He then got up from his judgment seat and started to leave. And the Jews all shouted, "We recognize only Caesar, not Jesus." Magi from the east brought him gifts that were fit for a king. And when Herod heard the Magi say that a king had been born, he tried to have him put to death. But as soon as his father Joseph learned of it, he took him and his mother and fled into Egypt. When Herod found out about this, he had all of the Hebrew infants in Bethlehem killed. When Pilate heard these words from them, his blood ran cold, and he had the boisterous crowd pipe down. Then he asked them, "Do you mean that this is the one that Herod sought?" "Indeed he is," the Jews replied, "the very same." And they stubbornly persisted with deafening shouts that Jesus be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. When Pilate sensed that he was getting nowhere with this, but was only stirring up a greater commotion, he took water in the sight of all, washed his hands before the sun, and said, "I am free of this man's blood. You will have to bear the blame." And everyone responded, "Let his blood fall on us and our children as well." But none of the Jews there washed their hands, and neither did Herod or any of his magistrates. Then Pilate got up, since none of them would wash, and King Herod commanded that the Lord be taken away, saying, "Do as I've instructed you." And Pilate, wishing to pacify the multitudes, ordered that the people's will be carried out. Pilate set Barabbas, the man who had been in prison for rebellion and murder, free among them, for he was their chosen one. Pilate then gave the command, and the curtain across from his judgment seat was pulled back. Then he said, "Jesus, your own people have convicted you for being their king. I have ordered that you be beaten as the law of the righteous emperors directs, and hung upon a cross in the very garden where you were taken. And the two evildoers, Justus and Dismas, are to be crucified alongside you." Now Joseph, a mutual friend of both Pilate and Jesus, was standing there. And when he realized that they were about to crucify him, Joseph approached Pilate and requested the Lord's body, so that he might bury it himself. Then Pilate sent a message to Herod requesting his remains. "Pilate, my good friend," Herod answered, "we would have buried him whether or not anyone had asked, seeing that the Sabbath day is almost here. You see, it stands written in the law, the sun must not be allowed to set on anyone who has been put to death." And Herod handed him over to the crowds on the eve of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So they grabbed the Lord, shoving him as they drove him on, saying, "Let us drag God's Son along now that he is subject to us." They placed a purple robe on him and set him on the judgment seat. "Judge fairly, O King of Israel," they sneered. One of them brought a crown of thorns and placed it on the head of the Lord. Now some of those who were standing there spat into his eyes, while others slapped him in the face, and still others poked him with a stick. Some pounded him and jeered, "Let us pay respect to the Son of God." But Pilate had ordered that Jesus be beaten, so the governor's soldiers seized the Lord Jesus, led him away, and ushered him into the palace, which is called the Praetorium, where the entire company of soldiers marshaled around him. They stripped his clothing off of him, placed a bright red and a purple robe on him. Then they twisted thorns into a crown and placed it upon his head. And after putting a staff into his right hand, they dropped to their knees before him and taunted him. Over and again they approached him and pretended worship and jibed, "O King of the Jews, how we glorify you!" Time and again they took that staff and beat him over the head with it, spitting all over him and dropping to their knees in feigned worship to him. Then at last Pilate turned him over to them to be crucified.